The sizzling oil crackled like gunfire as steam rose from the industrial grills of Château Belmont, Manhattan's most prestigious French restaurant, while 28-year-old Alexis Rivera endured another morning of systematic humiliation disguised as culinary training. What her fellow line cooks didn't know was that the quiet woman they dismissed as just another desperate culinary school dropout had spent the previous 8 years as a Navy SEAL demolitions expert, and that her seemingly gentle hands had once defused bombs under enemy fire in places that didn't exist on any official maps. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The breakfast rush at Château Belmont began before dawn, transforming the gleaming chrome kitchen into a battlefield of competing egos and razor-sharp knives. Executive Chef Damien Rousseau, a towering figure with salt and pepper hair and the temperament of a medieval tyrant, had made it his personal mission to remind Alexis that she was an unwelcome intruder in his domain. For 6 grueling weeks, since she'd somehow secured a position on the prep team through what he called misguided charity hiring, Rousseau had orchestrated a campaign of professional destruction that would have impressed military psychological warfare specialists. Rivera. Rousseau's voice cut through the kitchen's symphony of clattering pans and chopping knives like a blade through silk. Your knife work last night was pathetic. My grandmother could julienne vegetables faster than you, and she's been dead for 20 years. The surrounding cooks snickered as Alexis methodically arranged her mise en place, her movements precise and economical in a way that spoke of different training entirely. She'd learned long ago that reactions only provided more ammunition for people like Rousseau. The kitchen hierarchy at Château Belmont was more rigid than any military structure Alexis had ever encountered. Rousseau ruled from his elevated pass window like a general surveying the battlefield, while his sous chef Trevor Hawthorne served as his eager lieutenant in the campaign against her. Hawthorne was everything Rousseau valued: aggressive, loud, and utterly convinced that the presence of women in professional kitchens was a modern tragedy that threatened the integrity of classical French cuisine. "Look at her," Hawthorne muttered to the other line cooks during prep time, his voice carrying just enough to ensure Alexis heard every word. "Probably thinks she can charm her way through service with a pretty smile. This isn't some suburban bistro princess. This is Michelin-starred cuisine where weak links get people fired." What neither Rousseau nor Hawthorne understood was that Alexis Rivera had volunteered for this assignment. After 8 years of classified operations in hostile territories, she'd accepted a different kind of mission: protecting the daughter of a high-ranking government official who worked as a server at Château Belmont. Intelligence suggested that a foreign assassination team planned to target the restaurant, using the chaos of dinner service as cover for their operation. Alexis's job was to blend in, stay close to the target, and be ready when the threat materialized, but maintaining her cover meant enduring systematic humiliation from men who had never faced real danger in their lives. During the previous night's service, Rousseau had positioned himself directly behind her station, critiquing every movement with the precision of a sniper calculating windage. "Your sauce is breaking, Rivera. You're moving too slowly. You're taking up space that could be used by someone who actually belongs here." The constant psychological pressure was designed to break her spirit and force her to quit. Removing what Rousseau saw as a liability from his perfect kitchen, the isolation was methodical and complete. During family meal, when the staff gathered to eat before service, conversations would die when Alexis approached. Locker assignments placed her in the furthest corner from everyone else. Equipment distribution left her with the dullest knives and the most temperamental burners. Even the other female employees, intimidated by Rousseau's obvious hostility toward Alexis, kept their distance to avoid becoming targets themselves. Alexis had endured hostile environments before, but this was different. In military operations, the enemy was clearly defined and the mission objectives were explicit. Here, she was fighting a war of attrition against people who were supposed to be her teammates, all while maintaining a facade of vulnerability that went against every instinct. Honed through years of combat training, her handler had been specific. Under no circumstances could she reveal her true capabilities unless the primary mission was in immediate jeopardy. The restaurant's dining room existed in stark contrast to the kitchen's brutality. Elegant mahogany, paneling, crystal chandeliers, and tables set with precision that would impress a drill sergeant created an atmosphere of refined sophistication. Wealthy patrons savored dishes that took hours to prepare, never knowing that 20 feet away, their meals were crafted in an environment more toxic than most war zones. The irony wasn't lost on Alexis, who had protected diplomats in Baghdad cafes that felt safer than Château Belmont's kitchen. What her tormentors didn't realize was that every cutting remark, every deliberate obstacle, every attempt to humiliate her was being absorbed and cataloged by someone trained to operate under extreme psychological pressure. Alexis had survived interrogation resistance training, months of sleep deprivation during special operations, and the kind of stress that broke career soldiers. Rousseau's kitchen tantrums were merely background noise to someone who had once spent 72 hours in a bombed-out building, surrounded by hostiles, waiting for extraction. But the most dangerous aspect of her situation wasn't the professional harassment, it was the way it was affecting her ability to focus on the real mission. Intelligence reports suggested the assassination attempt would come soon, possibly during the upcoming wine tasting event that would bring together several high-value government targets. Alexis needed to be ready for anything, but Rousseau's constant interference was forcing her to divide her attention between maintaining her cover and scanning for genuine threats. As she prepped vegetables for the evening service, Alexis caught her reflection in the polished steel of her knife blade. The woman looking back appeared tired, overwhelmed, and defeated, exactly the image she needed to project. But behind her eyes burned something that neither Rousseau nor anyone else in the kitchen had ever seen: the cold, patient readiness of a warrior who had spent years learning to survive until the moment came to strike back. What none of them knew was that moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. And when it arrived, the quiet line cook they dismissed as weak would reveal capabilities that would transform their understanding of what real strength looked like. The kitchen of Château Belmont was about to become a battlefield in ways they never could have imagined. And Alexis Rivera was the only person in the building prepared for what was coming, preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 weeks into her assignment at Château Belmont, Alexis Rivera found herself alone in the prep kitchen at 4:30 a.m., an hour before even the most dedicated line cooks arrived for breakfast service. The solitude provided her first opportunity to practice movements that had nothing to do with julienning vegetables or preparing mise en place. In the dim light filtering through the restaurant's industrial windows, she moved through knife techniques that would have mystified any culinary school instructor. Her blade work was indeed different from what Rousseau expected, but not in the way he assumed. Each cut was executed with surgical precision, her grip modified from years of handling combat knives in life-or-death situations. The muscle memory was still there, how to maintain perfect edge control while moving at combat speed, how to transition seamlessly between cutting motions and defensive positions, how to use any blade as both tool and weapon. But she was careful to slow her movements during regular hours, deliberately fumbling cuts to maintain her cover as a struggling culinary student. Hidden beneath her standard issue chef's coat, Alexis wore a specialized undershirt designed by Navy Intelligence. Woven into the fabric were microsensors that monitored her heart rate, stress levels, and movement patterns. transmitting data to her handler through encrypted bursts that appeared as routine cell phone signals. The technology was invisible to casual observation, but provided her support team with real-time intelligence about her operational status and the stress she was enduring in the hostile kitchen environment, what her fellow cooks mistook for nervous energy during service was actually something far different. Alexis had developed the habit of constantly scanning the dining room through the kitchen's pass window, her eyes automatically cataloging exit routes, potential weapons, and anything that seemed out of place. Her training in situational awareness was so deeply ingrained that she couldn't turn it off. Every customer's seating position, every server's movement pattern, every delivery person's arrival was automatically assessed for potential threats. During quiet moments between prep work, Alexis would run her fingers along the kitchen's surfaces in ways that appeared absent-minded but were actually tactical reconnaissance. She was mapping the layout for potential combat scenarios, which counters could provide cover, where emergency exits were located, how quickly she could reach the dining room if needed. The industrial kitchen's steel surfaces and confined spaces actually provided excellent defensive positions for someone trained in close-quarters combat. Though she hoped never to need that knowledge, her locker contained items that would have puzzled anyone who discovered them. Beneath her spare chef's whites and personal effects was a small kit disguised as a first aid supplies. Inside were specialized tools that appeared to be basic medical equipment, but served dual purposes: surgical scissors that could cut through restraints, medical tape that was actually high-tensile climbing cord, and what looked like antiseptic wipes that were really chemical neutralizing agents for common toxins used in assassination attempts. The most telling sign of her background, however, was something no one had noticed yet: her reaction to sudden loud noises. While other kitchen staff would jump or startle when pans crashed or orders were shouted, Alexis remained perfectly calm, her body automatically shifting into a ready position that balanced preparation for either fight or flight. Years of operating in hostile environments had conditioned her to treat sudden sounds as potential threats requiring immediate tactical assessment rather than mere annoyances. Her knife roll, the sacred collection of blades that every serious cook carried, contained a secret that would have shocked anyone who examined it closely. While the knives appeared to be standard German steel culinary tools, 3 of them were actually custom forged by Navy armorsmiths. They were perfectly balanced for both cooking and combat applications, with handles modified for maximum grip security and blades that could penetrate body armor as easily as they could bone joints during butchering. When other cooks scrolled through social media or complained about management, Alexis would review encrypted messages disguised as recipe apps on her phone. Her handler provided regular updates on the threat assessment, changes in the target's schedule, and intelligence about potential assassination teams operating in the Manhattan area. The messages appeared to be discussions of cooking techniques and ingredient sourcing, but contained coded information about weapon signatures, surveillance patterns, and emergency extraction protocols. What made her cover particularly effective was that her genuine interest in cooking wasn't entirely fabricated. During downtime between military deployments, Alexis had actually taken cooking classes as a way to develop fine motor skills and learn about different cultural approaches to nutrition. Her knowledge of flavor profiles and cooking techniques was real, even if her motivation for being in the kitchen was entirely different from what everyone assumed. The psychological profile that had recommended her for this assignment noted her exceptional ability to compartmentalize different aspects of her identity. She could genuinely focus on prep work and kitchen techniques while simultaneously maintaining tactical awareness of her surroundings. This mental flexibility allowed her to ask authentic questions about cooking methods while secretly memorizing the restaurant security vulnerabilities and staff behavioral patterns. Her teammates had no idea that their struggling new colleague had spent the previous month studying building blueprints, memorizing the background of every employee, and learning the daily routines of their target. They didn't know that she could identify the caliber of a gunshot from 3 blocks away, or that she had once single-handedly extracted a captured intelligence asset from a hostile compound while outnumbered 12 to 1. Most importantly, they had no concept that the woman they dismissed as weak and unsuitable for professional cooking had capabilities that would transform the kitchen of Château Belmont into one of the most secure locations in Manhattan if the situation demanded it. Her grandfather, a decorated Marine who had taught her that real strength often required appearing weak until the moment came to strike, would have been proud of her performance. But as she finished her early morning prep work and prepared for another day of enduring Rousseau's calculated humiliation, Alexis received an encrypted message that changed everything. Intelligence suggested the assassination attempt might come sooner than expected, possibly during tonight's service. Her handler's instructions were clear: maintain cover at all costs, but be ready for immediate action. The quiet line cook who fumbled with her knife work was about to discover that sometimes the greatest test of a warrior's skill isn't knowing when to fight. It's knowing how long you can wait before fighting becomes unavoidable. And that moment was approaching faster than anyone in the kitchen could possibly imagine. By week 7, Chef Rousseau had elevated his campaign against Alexis from mere professional harassment to what could only be described as systematic psychological warfare. The morning briefings, which had once been routine discussions of daily specials and prep assignments, had transformed into public humiliation sessions designed specifically to break her spirit and force her resignation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rousseau announced during Monday's staff meeting, his voice dripping with theatrical disdain, "I want to discuss the epidemic of mediocrity that's been plaguing our kitchen." His eyes locked onto Alexis with laser precision. "When I accepted Rivera into this establishment, I was assured she possessed the basic competencies required for professional cooking. Instead, I've discovered that some people simply lack the genetic disposition for excellence." The kitchen staff shuffled uncomfortably as Rousseau began pacing behind Alexis's station, like a prosecutor addressing a jury. Sous Chef Hawthorne stood nearby with crossed arms and a satisfied smirk, clearly enjoying the show. The morning prep team, including veteran line cooks Carson Williams and Dmitry Petrov, avoided eye contact with Alexis as their executive chef prepared to dissect her performance from the previous evening's service. "Last night's butternut squash veloute," Rousseau continued, picking up a small bowl from the pass counter, "was supposedly prepared according to our established recipe. Yet somehow Rivera managed to transform a classic French soup into what I can only describe as cafeteria-grade disappointment." He held the bowl aloft like evidence in a criminal trial. The texture was grainy, the seasoning was amateur, and the temperature was inconsistent throughout service. This is not cooking, this is culinary vandalism. What Rousseau didn't know, and what Alexis couldn't explain without blowing her cover, was that her soup had been deliberately sabotaged by Hawthorne during the evening rush. She had watched him add cold stock to her pot while she was occupied with another order. But acknowledging the sabotage would have required admitting she possessed the tactical awareness to monitor multiple threats simultaneously, a skill set that would have raised uncomfortable questions about her background. The psychological pressure campaign extended far beyond public criticism. Rousseau had begun implementing what he called efficiency assessments that were transparently designed to highlight Alexis's supposed inadequacies. Her prep assignments were consistently the most time-consuming and technically demanding, while she was given access to the kitchen's worst equipment. Her knives were mysteriously dull each morning, despite being properly maintained. Her cutting boards were warped and unstable, and her station's burners fluctuated between scorching and barely functional. During service, Rousseau positioned himself directly behind her workspace, providing a running commentary on her performance that was audible to the entire kitchen. "Slower, Rivera. Your grandmother could move faster, and she's been dead longer than you've been alive." Watch that sauce, it's breaking because you don't understand fundamental emulsion principles. Are you actually trying, or is this your best effort? The campaign began affecting her relationship with other staff members in ways that threatened her mission effectiveness. Server Catalina Vasquez, the government official's daughter she was assigned to protect, had initially been friendly and welcoming. But as Rousseau's criticism intensified, Catalina began treating Alexis with the cautious distance that restaurant employees maintain around colleagues who might be terminated at any moment. "I feel bad for her," Alexis overheard Catalina telling another server during a brief break. But Chef Rousseau has never been wrong about someone's potential. If he thinks she doesn't belong here, maybe she should consider finding a different career path before things get worse. More concerning was how the hostile environment was beginning to isolate her from critical intelligence gathering opportunities. Kitchen staff, who had initially included her in casual conversations, now excluded her from discussions about irregular deliveries, unusual customer requests, or changes to the restaurant security protocols, exactly the kind of information she needed to identify potential threats to her target. Hawthorne had taken to scheduling her for the most demanding shifts with minimal support, ensuring she would be overwhelmed and unable to maintain the tactical awareness necessary for protection duties. During Friday's dinner service, he assigned her to handle both appetizer prep and sauce stations simultaneously while short-staffing her section, creating a scenario where failure was virtually guaranteed. "This is how we identify who belongs in a professional kitchen," Hawthorne explained to the other cooks while Alexis struggled to keep up with impossible demands. "Pressure reveals character. Some people rise to meet challenges, and others." He gestured dismissively in her direction. "Others prove they were never qualified in the first place." The isolation campaign extended beyond working hours. Her locker had been moved to the basement storage area, away from the main staff area. Shift schedules were posted at the last minute, making it difficult for her to coordinate with her handler or maintain surveillance patterns. Even casual social interactions became strained as other employees distanced themselves from someone who had clearly fallen out of favor with management. But the most insidious aspect of Rousseau's campaign was how he had begun undermining her confidence in ways that went beyond professional criticism. During quiet moments between services, he would make comments designed to attack her sense of self-worth. "You know, Rivera, there's no shame in admitting when you're in over your head. Some people are meant for greatness, and others are meant to serve those people. Perhaps it's time to accept which category you belong in." The psychological pressure was having an unintended effect that Rousseau couldn't have anticipated. Instead of breaking her spirit, his campaign was activating defense mechanisms that had been honed through years of military training. Alexis found herself automatically shifting into what her instructors had called survival mode, a state of heightened awareness and emotional detachment that allowed her to function effectively under extreme stress. Her handler had noticed the change during their last encrypted communication. "Your stress indicators are elevated but stable," the message had read. "Maintain cover integrity, but be advised that prolonged psychological pressure could compromise mission effectiveness. Are you able to continue operational status?" Alexis had responded affirmatively, but she knew the situation was becoming unsustainable. The constant harassment was making it increasingly difficult to focus on threat assessment and target protection. More critically, she was beginning to understand that Rousseau's campaign wasn't just about forcing her to quit, it was about completely destroying her credibility so that even if she tried to warn anyone about potential dangers, her concerns would be dismissed as the desperate accusations of a failing employee. As she finished her prep work for the evening service, Alexis realized that Rousseau had unknowingly created the perfect conditions for an assassination attempt to succeed. By isolating her from the staff and undermining her authority, he had effectively neutralized the one person in the building capable of recognizing and responding to a professional threat. What neither Rousseau nor Hawthorne understood was that their campaign had pushed her to a decision point that would change everything. The time for passive endurance was coming to an end, and when the moment arrived to choose between maintaining her cover and protecting innocent lives, there would be no hesitation about which mission took priority. The quiet line cook they had spent weeks trying to break was about to remind them that some people don't break, they adapt. They prepare, and they wait for the perfect moment to show their true capabilities. The evening that would shatter everyone's assumptions began like any other. Brutal service at Château Belmont, with Alexis assigned to the most demanding station. During their busiest night of the week, Saturday evening brought Manhattan's elite through their doors. Diplomats, celebrities, and business moguls who expected perfection with every course. Rousseau had positioned her at the guard manger station, responsible for all cold appetizers and salads, while simultaneously demanding she assist with sauce preparation during peak service, a workload typically handled by 2 experienced cooks. Dining room was completely booked with a waiting list that stretched into next week, and the kitchen hummed with the controlled chaos of a military operation. Servers rushed between stations with practiced efficiency, while line cooks worked in synchronized precision, their movements choreographed through years of high-pressure service. In the midst of this organized mayhem, Alexis appeared to struggle with tasks that veteran cooks executed without thought, her movements seemingly clumsy and inefficient. Compared to the fluid expertise surrounding her, what happened next would be discussed in hushed tones among the kitchen staff for weeks afterward. At exactly 8:47 p.m., during the height of dinner service, a catastrophic equipment failure brought the kitchen to the edge of complete collapse. The main gas line feeding the central cooking station suddenly shut down, leaving half the kitchen without flame, just as dozens of orders were in various stages of preparation. Simultaneously, a power surge knocked out the industrial refrigeration system, threatening thousands of dollars worth of ingredients with spoilage. Rousseau's face went ashen as he realized the magnitude of the crisis. A full dining room of VIP customers, orders already fired and partially prepared, and half his cooking capacity suddenly eliminated. The restaurant's reputation hung in the balance as temperatures began rising in the walk-in coolers and expedited orders backed up at the pass. His usual commanding presence faltered as he tried to coordinate damage control while angry servers demanded answers about delayed orders. "Shut down the gas to everything." Hawthorne shouted over the confusion, but his voice carried the edge of panic rather than authority. Several line cooks stood frozen, unsure how to adapt their cooking methods to the sudden equipment limitations. The carefully orchestrated rhythm of service dissolved into confusion as everyone tried to understand what could be salvaged and what would need to be completely restarted. That's when Alexis Rivera stepped forward and demonstrated capabilities that defied every assumption her colleagues had made about her competence. Without seeking permission or waiting for instructions, she began moving through the kitchen with fluid precision that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Her hands worked with surgical accuracy as she quickly assessed which dishes could be finished using alternative methods and which needed immediate attention to prevent total loss. "Get me 3 portable butane burners from the catering storage," she called to a nearby cook, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to crisis management. "Move all the proteins to the wood-fired grill and increase the flame to maximum. Everything in the pass cooler needs to be transferred to the wine cellar immediately. The temperature differential will buy us 20 minutes before spoilage begins." The kitchen staff stared in amazement as the woman they'd dismissed as incompetent began orchestrating a response that demonstrated encyclopedic knowledge of commercial kitchen operations. She directed traffic with precision timing, rearranging cooking priorities to maximize the limited available equipment, while simultaneously calculating temperature requirements and timing adjustments needed for each modified preparation method. "Rivera, how did you?" Rousseau began, but Alexis was already 3 steps ahead of his question. "Chef, We can finish the beef course using the plancha. If we increase temperature by 40 degrees and reduce cooking time by 2 minutes. Needs immediate attention. Transfer everything to the convection oven at 450 and rotate every 6 minutes. The sauces can be finished using the steam table if we adjust the cream ratios. Her instructions came rapid fire, each one demonstrating technical knowledge that should have taken years to acquire. But what truly shocked the veteran kitchen staff was her ability to coordinate multiple complex processes simultaneously while maintaining perfect awareness of timing requirements for every order. She moved between stations like a conductor directing an orchestra, adjusting techniques and supervising temperature control with expertise that seemed to come from nowhere. Her knife work, which had appeared clumsy during regular service, suddenly revealed itself as precisely controlled efficiency that wasted no motion or time. "Behind you, sharp knife," she called out while navigating the crowded kitchen, carrying the blade with the confidence of someone who understood its weight and balance perfectly. Her movements were fluid and economical, demonstrating muscle memory that spoke of extensive training in precision work under pressure. The transformation was so complete that several cooks found themselves questioning whether they had been watching the same person for the past 7 weeks. Within 15 minutes, Alexis had successfully modified the preparation methods for 18 different dishes, coordinated the safe storage of perishable ingredients, and established alternative cooking processes that would allow service to continue with minimal delay. Orders began flowing from the kitchen again, and the panic that had gripped the dining room staff gradually subsided as it became clear that dinner service would not end in catastrophe. Hawthorne watched in stunned silence as she directed 2 experienced line cooks through a sauce preparation technique he had never seen before, achieving results that exceeded their normal standards despite the equipment limitations. The sauce, which should have been impossible to prepare without proper gas flames, emerged with perfect consistency and flavor balance that drew appreciative nods from servers who tasted it before delivery. "Where did you learn to do that?" asked Carson Williams, a 10-year veteran of professional kitchens who had never witnessed such comprehensive crisis management from someone supposedly inexperienced. His question carried genuine respect rather than the condescending curiosity that had characterized most interactions with Alexis up to that point. "Previous experience," Alexis replied quietly, already returning to her assigned station as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But the damage to her carefully maintained cover was already done. Every person in the kitchen had witnessed capabilities that completely contradicted the struggling amateur persona she had been projecting for weeks. Rousseau approached her station. As service began returning to normal rhythm, his expression unreadable. For the first time since her arrival, he looked at her with something approaching professional consideration rather than dismissive contempt. The crisis had revealed a level of competence that forced him to reconsider every assumption he had made about her qualifications and background. "That was impressive work, Rivera," he said carefully, his voice lacking its usual edge of sarcasm. "I wasn't aware you had experience with large-scale crisis management." Alexis met his gaze steadily, knowing that her response would be critical to maintaining what remained of her cover story. "Sometimes pressure brings out abilities you didn't know you had. Chef, my culinary school covered emergency procedures, but I've never had to use them in a real situation before tonight." The explanation was plausible but incomplete, and she could see in Rousseau's eyes that he wasn't entirely convinced. More concerning was the way other staff members were now looking at her, with curiosity rather than dismissal, respect instead of contempt. The dramatic demonstration of competence had created exactly the kind of attention she had been trying to avoid throughout her assignment. As the evening wound down and normal kitchen operations resumed, Alexis realized that the equipment failure had forced a revelation that would change everything about her position at Château Belmont. She had saved the restaurant's reputation and prevented financial disaster, but in doing so, She had exposed capabilities that raised uncomfortable questions about who she really was, and where she had acquired such expertise. The quiet line cook who had been dismissed as incompetent was now a subject of intense speculation and growing respect. But more importantly, she had demonstrated under pressure that when the situation demanded it, she possessed skills that went far beyond anything expected from a struggling culinary student. The question now was whether anyone would begin connecting the dots between her crisis management abilities and other aspects of her background that didn't quite add up. The Monday morning following the equipment crisis brought an atmosphere to Château Belmont's kitchen that Alexis had not anticipated. Rather than the grudging respect she might have expected after her performance during Saturday's emergency, she discovered that her demonstration of competence had triggered an even more sophisticated campaign of isolation designed to undermine her newfound credibility and return her to her previous status as the kitchen's designated failure. Rousseau's approach had evolved from overt hostility to something far more calculated and dangerous. During the morning staff briefing, he made no mention of Saturday night's events or Alexis's role in preventing disaster. Instead, he addressed the crisis as if it had been resolved through collective effort and his own leadership, effectively erasing her contributions from the official narrative that would shape how other staff members remembered the incident. Saturday evening demonstrated the importance of maintaining composure during unexpected challenges. Rousseau announced to the assembled kitchen staff, "Through proper training and adherence to established protocols, we were able to adapt our service methods and maintain our standards despite equipment failures. This is what separates professional kitchens from amateur operations, the ability to function as a cohesive unit when circumstances demand flexibility." The message was subtle but unmistakable. Saturday's success belonged to the team and the leadership, not to any individual performer. Alexis watched as several cooks who had witnessed her crisis management firsthand nodded along with Rousseau's revised version of events, their memories already being shaped by his authoritative reframing of what had actually occurred during those critical 15 minutes. Hawthorne had taken the systematic exclusion to new levels of sophistication. During prep assignments, he began pairing Alexis with the kitchen's most unreliable and problematic staff members, ensuring that any task she was assigned would be compromised by her partner's incompetence or attitude problems. When she was teamed with Jerome Martinez, a prep cook notorious for his sloppy knife work and poor attention to detail, her station's output inevitably reflected his limitations rather than her capabilities. Rivera's station is consistently behind schedule, Hawthorne would announce during service, neglecting to mention that she was working with a partner who required constant supervision and correction. Professional kitchens require consistency and reliability. We can't afford to have weak links disrupting our workflow, regardless of occasional flashes of competence. The isolation extended to information access in ways that directly threatened her primary mission. Kitchen staff meetings, where security procedures and special event protocols were discussed, began occurring at times when Alexis was scheduled for different duties. Critical information about catering deliveries, VIP dining arrangements, and changes to the restaurant's access procedures, exactly the intelligence she needed to protect, Catalina was shared during briefings she was systematically excluded from attending. More troubling was how her demonstrated competence had been weaponized against her in unexpected ways. Other staff members, rather than gaining respect for her abilities, had begun viewing her Saturday performance with suspicion and resentment. The fact that she had hidden such extensive knowledge while appearing to struggle for weeks created doubt about her authenticity and motives among colleagues who were already predisposed to distrust her. Something doesn't add up about Rivera. She overheard line cook Dmitry Petrov telling Carson Williams during a smoke break outside the service entrance, "Nobody goes from fumbling basic prep work to orchestrating crisis management like that." Either she was faking incompetence for weeks, or there's something about her background that she's not telling us. Either way, it makes me uncomfortable. Working alongside someone who's clearly not being honest about who she is. The whispered conversations and suspicious glances created an environment where her colleagues viewed her with active distrust rather than mere dismissal. Her previous isolation had been based on perceived incompetence, which was insulting but manageable. This new isolation was based on questions about her integrity and honesty, which made every interaction fraught with tension and suspicion that could compromise her mission effectiveness. Catalina Vasquez, the government official's daughter whose protection was Alexis's primary objective, had begun exhibiting behaviors that suggested she was absorbing the kitchen's negative atmosphere regarding her supposed protector. During brief interactions between kitchen and service staff, Catalina treated Alexis with polite distance that hadn't existed before Saturday's incident. The protective relationship that Alexis needed to maintain was deteriorating precisely because she had demonstrated the competence necessary to actually protect her target. "I heard about Saturday night," Catalina mentioned casually while picking up plates from the pass. "Everyone's saying you handled the crisis really well, but some people are wondering why you never showed those skills before. It's like you've been hiding who you really are." Her tone carried curiosity mixed with wariness, suggesting that the questions about Alexis's authenticity were spreading beyond the kitchen staff to the servers and front-of-house personnel. The systematic exclusion reached its peak during Thursday's staff scheduling meeting, which Alexis discovered had been moved to an earlier time without notification. When she arrived at the usual meeting time, she found only a revised schedule posted on the bulletin board that assigned her to the most undesirable shifts with minimal support staff. Her weekend schedule, traditionally the highest revenue periods, when she could observe the most VIP customers, had been replaced with Tuesday and Wednesday shifts when the restaurant served a completely different clientele. "Unfortunately, Rivera," Hawthorne explained when she questioned the schedule changes, "your recent inconsistencies have raised concerns about reliability during our most critical service periods. We've decided to give you some time to demonstrate sustained competence during less demanding shifts before considering you for premium assignments again." The message was clear. Her moment of excellence had been reframed as an anomaly that highlighted her previous poor performance rather than evidence of hidden capabilities. The exclusion from weekend shifts would severely limit her ability to monitor Catalina during the times when intelligence suggested an assassination attempt was most likely to occur, exactly when the restaurant hosted high-profile political and business figures who might provide cover for hostile operatives. More insidiously, Rousseau had begun implementing what he called performance documentation for Alexis specifically. Every task she completed, every interaction with other staff members, and every aspect of her work was being recorded and evaluated in ways that didn't apply to other employees. The heightened scrutiny made it nearly impossible for her to engage in the subtle intelligence gathering and surveillance activities that were essential to her protective mission. "We want to ensure that we're providing appropriate support for your professional development," Rousseau explained during a private meeting in his office, surrounded by clipboards full of performance evaluations that painted a picture of inconsistent competence and questionable reliability. "Sometimes talent appears in unexpected ways, and we need to document your progress to understand how best to utilize your unique skill set." The performance documentation served multiple purposes. It created a paper trail that could justify her eventual termination. It required her to explain and account for every action in ways that made covert activities nearly impossible. And it established a narrative of instability that would discredit anything she might try to report about security concerns or suspicious activities in the restaurant. By Friday evening, Alexis realized that her situation had become more dangerous than the direct hostility she had previously endured. The systematic exclusion was isolating her from critical intelligence while undermining her credibility with the very people she needed to protect. Her handler's latest encrypted message confirmed her worst fears. Target assessment indicates imminent threat. Maintain proximity to subject. Mission parameters unchanged despite operational complications. The assignment required her to be close to Catalina during potential assassination attempts, but the kitchen's response to her demonstrated competence had effectively destroyed her ability to operate in that environment. She was being pushed toward a choice between maintaining her cover and completing her mission, a decision that was rapidly becoming impossible to avoid. As she cleaned her station at the end of another shift filled with isolation and suspicion, Alexis understood that the systematic exclusion had accomplished something Rousseau never intended. It had forced her to confront the reality that her cover story was no longer sustainable, and that protecting innocent lives might require revealing exactly who she really was, regardless of the consequences to her career or future assignments. The encrypted message arrived at 3:17 a.m. on Thursday morning, jolting Alexis from the light sleep that had become her standard since the systematic exclusion campaign intensified. Her secure phone vibrated with the specific pattern that indicated priority intelligence from her handler, and the contents of the message transformed her assignment from protective surveillance to active threat prevention in ways she had hoped never to encounter. Priority Alpha. Multiple intelligence sources confirm assassination team arrival NYC. Primary target, Catalina Vasquez. Secondary targets, restaurant patrons during Friday evening wine tasting event. Estimated team size, 4 to 6 operatives with military training. Method, unknown, likely during service hours for maximum chaos. Extraction, compromised. You are alone until situation resolves. Maintain cover unless civilian lives in immediate danger. Authorization, weapons free if identified threats confirmed. Alexis stared at the message until it automatically deleted after 60 seconds, her mind immediately shifting into operational planning mode. Friday's wine tasting event was Château Belmont's most prestigious monthly gathering, attracting politicians, diplomats, and business leaders whose security details would create the perfect cover for a professional assassination team. The event was exactly 18 hours away, and her current isolation from kitchen operations meant she had virtually no intelligence about security preparations or guest arrangements. The timing was catastrophically perfect from the assassin's perspective. Friday evening service combined maximum VIP target density with the kitchen chaos necessary to mask unusual activities. More critically, Alexis's systematic exclusion from weekend shifts meant she wasn't officially scheduled to work during the event, eliminating her legitimate reason to be present when the attack occurred. Rousseau's campaign had inadvertently created the ideal conditions for the assassination to succeed without interference from the one person capable of stopping it. Her phone buzzed again, with a follow-up message. Restaurant floor plan suggest primary approach through service entrance during peak preparation hours. Estimated time window, 6 o'clock to 8 p.m. when kitchen staff focused on event setup. Catalina scheduled to work main dining room throughout event. Multiple escape routes available through basement access and loading dock. You are the only asset positioned to prevent completion of mission. The weight of absolute responsibility settled on Alexis's shoulders like a familiar burden from her military service. No backup, no support team, no official authority to take action until lives were already in danger. She would need to identify professional killers who had spent weeks studying the restaurant's operations while maintaining a cover story that was already under intense scrutiny from hostile colleagues. Friday morning brought news that shattered any hope of managing the situation through subtle intervention. During the staff briefing, Rousseau announced changes to the evening staffing arrangement that confirmed Alexis's worst fears about her exclusion from the critical time period. Tonight's wine tasting represents the pinnacle of our monthly service standards, Rousseau declared to the assembled kitchen staff. Accordingly, I've selected our most reliable and experienced team members for this prestigious event. Hawthorne will oversee appetizer preparation, Williams will handle the main course station, and Petrov will manage dessert presentation. Support staff has been chosen based on proven consistency and professional reliability. Alexis's name was conspicuously absent from the assignments, confirming that she would have no legitimate access to the kitchen during the hours when intelligence suggested the attack would occur. Her request to volunteer for additional duties was dismissed before she could fully articulate it. Rivera, your focus should be on improving your baseline performance during regular service before we consider you for special events. Rousseau replied with finality. Tonight's gathering requires precision and reliability that, frankly, given your recent inconsistencies, we cannot risk compromising. The systematic exclusion had reached its logical conclusion. She was being prevented from protecting her target during the exact window when professional killers were planning to strike. Every decision Rousseau had made to undermine her credibility was now actively facilitating the assassination attempt he had no idea was approaching. Desperate to gather intelligence about the evening's security arrangements, Alexis attempted to engage Catalina during the brief overlap between lunch prep and dinner setup. But her target's growing wariness made the conversation awkward and unproductive, yielding no useful information about guest lists, seating arrangements, or security protocols for the event. I heard you're not working tonight, Catalina mentioned, while reviewing her section assignments for the wine tasting. Probably for the best, these events can be really stressful, and Chef Rousseau doesn't tolerate any mistakes when VIP guests are involved. Maybe you can use the evening to catch up on some rest or work on your knife skills. The casual dismissal confirmed that Catalina had no awareness of the danger she would face in less than 8 hours, and no reason to trust warnings from someone whose competence and honesty had been systematically questioned by the restaurant's leadership. Even if Alexis revealed the threat directly, her credibility had been so thoroughly undermined that such warnings would likely be dismissed as desperate attention-seeking from a failing employee. Her handler's final message arrived at 2 p.m., containing intelligence that eliminated any remaining hope for conventional resolution. Surveillance confirms team positioned in proximity to restaurant. Visual identification matches known international operatives specializing in public venue attacks. No law enforcement assets available for coordination. Repeat, you are the only protective resource available. Civilian notification not recommended due to panic potential and operational security concerns. The message was clear. She was completely alone, facing professional killers with no authority to take action until people started dying. The wine tasting would proceed as scheduled with over 60 VIP guests, including Catalina, completely unaware that they were walking into what intelligence services classified as a high-probability lethal incident. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Manhattan, Alexis made the decision that would define not only her military career, but potentially the lives of everyone in Château Belmont that evening. She would attend the wine tasting without permission, without official assignment, and without any backup beyond the skills she had spent 8 years developing in the world's most dangerous places. Her civilian clothing was selected with tactical considerations: dark colors for concealment, flexible materials for movement, and layers that could conceal the compact sidearm she would retrieve from her emergency cache hidden in the restaurant's basement storage area. The weapon had been positioned there during her first week, disguised as cleaning supplies in a location only she knew about. The plan was necessarily simple because complex operations required coordination she didn't have. She would enter the restaurant through the service entrance during shift change when her presence might go unnoticed, position herself where she could observe both Catalina and potential approach routes, and wait for the killers to reveal themselves through their actions. Once identified, she would eliminate the threats with maximum speed and minimum civilian exposure, What made the situation particularly dangerous was that she would need to distinguish professional assassins from legitimate restaurant staff, security, personnel, and VIP guests while operating in an environment where her own colleagues viewed her with suspicion and hostility. A mistaken target identification could result in civilian casualties that would destroy her career and potentially trigger an international incident. But the alternative, allowing professional killers to operate freely in a crowded restaurant, while the person trained to stop them sat at home because of workplace politics, was unacceptable by any moral or professional standard she had ever learned to respect. As evening approached and the first guests began arriving for what they believed would be an elegant wine tasting, Alexis Rivera prepared to discover whether 8 years of Navy SEAL training would be sufficient to prevent a massacre that everyone else remained completely unaware was about to begin. The quiet line cook who had been systematically excluded from tonight's service was about to gatecrash the most important mission of her career. Knowing that success would require revealing capabilities that would end her cover forever, while failure would result in casualties, she had been specifically assigned to prevent. In 6 hours, the elegant dining room of Château Belmont would become a battlefield, and only one person in the building understood what was coming. At 4:30 p.m., as Château Belmont's kitchen staff began the intricate preparations for the evening's wine tasting, Alexis received the devastating news that would transform an already impossible mission into a nightmare scenario of deliberate sabotage. Her secure phone vibrated with an emergency message that shattered any remaining hope of managing the situation through careful positioning and surveillance. Critical update. Intelligence intercept confirms assassination team has insider assistance. Kitchen staff member compromised. Identity unknown. Team has detailed restaurant layout, security protocols, and staff schedules. Your exclusion from tonight's service was not coincidental. You were specifically targeted for removal from operational area. Compromised asset likely feeding information about your activities. Trust no one. The implications hit Alexis like a physical blow. Someone inside Château Belmont had been working with the assassination team, providing intelligence about restaurant operations and deliberately manipulating her assignment schedule to ensure she would be absent during the attack. The systematic exclusion she had attributed to Rousseau's petty vindictiveness was actually part of a carefully orchestrated plan to neutralize the one person capable of preventing the massacre. Her mind raced through the possibilities as she analyzed every interaction from the past 2 weeks. The equipment failure that had forced her to reveal her capabilities could have been sabotage designed to test her responses and assess her true skill level. The schedule changes that kept her away from critical briefings might have been coordinated to prevent her from discovering security vulnerabilities that the assassination team planned to exploit. Even her isolation from other staff members could have been orchestrated to ensure she had no allies who might notice suspicious activities or question unusual personnel movements. The most chilling realization was that her cover identity had likely been compromised from the beginning. Professional assassination teams didn't operate without extensive intelligence preparation, and her assignment to protect Catalina would have been discovered through the same government channels that the hostile operatives had apparently penetrated. The insider wasn't just providing restaurant logistics, they were specifically working to eliminate her as a protective asset. At 5:15 p.m., Hawthorne approached her with news that confirmed her worst suspicions about the level of manipulation she was facing. His expression carried the satisfaction of someone delivering a carefully planned blow, disguised as routine administrative decision-making. "Rivera, there's been a change to tonight's security protocols," he announced with barely concealed smugness. "Management has decided that all non-essential personnel need to be completely clear of the building during the wine tasting event. Insurance requirements for VIP gatherings, you understand. You'll need to remove any personal items from your locker and vacate the premises by 6 p.m. The timing was devastating and clearly deliberate. 6 o'clock was precisely when intelligence suggested the assassination team would begin their infiltration, using the chaos of event preparation to mask their approach. By forcing her to leave the building at that exact moment, the insider was ensuring she would be physically unable to respond when the attack commenced. "What about the other staff members who aren't working tonight?" Alexis asked, testing whether this restriction applied universally or was specifically targeted at her. "Other personnel have legitimate reasons to remain on property," Hawthorne replied smoothly. "Maintenance schedules, inventory duties, equipment preparation for tomorrow's service. Your situation is different, since you're not assigned to any specific tasks tonight. Management feels it's appropriate for you to use the time for personal activities away from the restaurant." The manipulation was sophisticated and thorough. By framing her removal as a routine security measure rather than punitive action, they avoided creating the kind of obvious targeting that might prompt her to question the underlying motives. To any observer, including restaurant management, who might not be part of the conspiracy, it would appear to be a reasonable precaution for someone who had already demonstrated unreliability during critical service periods. But the most insidious aspect of the manipulation was how it leveraged the legitimate isolation campaign that Rousseau had been conducting for weeks. Her systematic exclusion from kitchen operations provided perfect cover for removing her during the critical time period, because her absence would appear to be the natural continuation of existing disciplinary measures rather than evidence of a conspiracy to facilitate murder. At 5:45 p.m., as Alexis gathered her personal items from the basement locker that had been relocated to isolate her from other staff members, she discovered the final piece of evidence that confirmed the scope of the betrayal she was facing. Hidden behind her folded chef's whites was a small electronic device that she immediately recognized as a professional surveillance transmitter, the kind used by intelligence agencies to monitor target movements and communications. The device was military-grade hardware that would have required significant resources and expertise to acquire and deploy. Its presence in her locker meant that her activities had been under constant surveillance, that her conversations had been monitored, and that her every movement within the restaurant had been tracked and reported to hostile operatives. The insider hadn't just been providing general intelligence about restaurant operations. They had been conducting comprehensive surveillance of her. Specifically, her secure phone vibrated with one final message as she prepared to leave the building. Surveillance device discovery confirms compromise level. Assume all communications monitored. Abort mission and extract immediately. Repeat. Mission abort authorized. Your position is completely compromised. Civilian casualties acceptable versus agent loss. The message represented everything she had been trained to reject throughout her military career. The authorization to abandon innocent people to professional killers because her own safety was deemed more valuable than their lives violated every principle that had motivated her to accept dangerous assignments in hostile territories. The suggestion that Catalina's death was acceptable if it preserved her cover for future operations was a calculation she was psychologically incapable of accepting. Standing in the basement storage area where she had once hidden her emergency weapon cache, Alexis made the decision that would define not only the next few hours, but potentially the rest of her life. She would ignore the abort order, violate direct instructions from her handler, and take unauthorized action that would end her career in military intelligence, regardless of the outcome. But first, she needed to understand exactly how extensive the manipulation had been and who was responsible for orchestrating her systematic removal from the protection detail. The surveillance device in her locker suggested that the conspiracy included someone with access to restricted areas and detailed knowledge of her daily routines, someone who had been watching her closely enough to place monitoring equipment. Without detection, her analysis of the timing and coordination required for the Manipulation pointed to a conclusion she had been hoping to avoid. The insider was likely someone in a position of authority within the restaurant, someone who could influence staffing decisions and access security protocols without raising suspicion. The most probable candidates were either Rousseau himself or Hawthorne, both of whom had demonstrated unusual interest in her activities and had been instrumental in creating the isolation that was now being exploited to facilitate the assassination. The revelation that her professional tormentors might actually be enemy operatives rather than merely hostile colleagues added a layer of personal betrayal to an already complex tactical situation. The systematic harassment she had endured for weeks hadn't been petty workplace politics. It had been psychological warfare designed to weaken her effectiveness and create conditions that would allow professional killers to operate without interference. As 6 p.m. approached, and the first guests began arriving for what they believed would be an elegant evening of wine and cuisine, Alexis prepared to violate every protocol she had ever been taught about operational security and chain of command. The manipulation had been comprehensive and sophisticated, but it had also revealed the desperation of her enemies to remove her from the equation. The fact that they had gone to such elaborate lengths to ensure her absence meant they considered her a significant threat to their plans. That assessment was about to prove accurate in ways they had not anticipated, because the quiet line cook they had worked so hard to exclude was about to demonstrate why Navy SEALs were never supposed to operate alone, but always remain dangerous. When they did. At 6:47 p.m., as Alexis sat in her car across the street from Château Belmont, watching elegantly dressed guests stream through the main entrance, the peaceful facade of Manhattan's most prestigious wine-tasting event shattered without warning. The first sign of catastrophe came not through her surveillance equipment or tactical awareness, but through the primitive human instinct that recognized the sound of automatic gunfire echoing from within the restaurant's dining room. 3 sharp bursts of suppressed weapon fire penetrated the thick walls of the building, followed immediately by the unmistakable crash of break-in glass and the beginning of human screams that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The assassination team had moved ahead of their projected timeline, striking during the cocktail hour when guests were scattered throughout the restaurant rather than seated at assigned tables, creating maximum chaos and eliminating any possibility of organized evacuation. Through the restaurant's large front windows, Alexis could see the elegant gathering transform into pandemonium as 67 VIP guests, including diplomats, business leaders, and political figures, dove for cover behind overturned tables while muzzle flashes illuminated the dining room like deadly strobe lights. The professional killers had chosen their timing perfectly, attacking during the vulnerable period when security details were relaxed and civilian. Guests were focused on social interaction rather than threat assessment. Her secure phone had been buzzing continuously with override messages from her handler. Do not engage. Repeat. Do not engage. Law enforcement en route. Maintain distance and observe only. But the distant wail of approaching sirens indicated that police response would arrive minutes too late to prevent the systematic execution that was already underway inside the restaurant. A figure in chef's whites appeared at one of the dining room windows, hands pressed against the glass in obvious terror, before being yanked backward into the chaos by an unseen assailant. The sight of restaurant staff being used as human shields or eliminated as witnesses confirmed that this was not a targeted assassination of specific individuals. It was a massacre designed to send a message through maximum civilian casualties. Tactical situation was everything she had been trained never to enter. Unknown number of hostiles with superior positioning. Innocent civilians scattered throughout the battle space. No backup or coordination, and no intelligence about the attackers' specific capabilities or objectives. Every principle of special operations doctrine screamed at her to maintain distance and wait for properly equipped response teams to neutralize the threat through coordinated assault. But through the chaos visible in the dining room windows, Alexis caught sight of a server's uniform that stopped her heart. Catalina Vasquez was trapped behind the bar area, crouched low with 3 other staff members, while automatic weapon fire periodically swept across their position. Her primary protection target was pinned down in a location that offered minimal cover, with professional killers systematically working their way through the restaurant to eliminate witnesses and complete their mission. The moment that defined everything came at 6:52 p.m. when Alexis saw one of the attackers, a man in dark tactical gear carrying an assault rifle, begin moving deliberately toward the bar area where Catalina was hiding. His movements were methodical and purposeful, suggesting he knew exactly where to find his primary target among the dozens of panicked civilians. The insider information that had facilitated her exclusion from the building was now guiding the killers directly to the person she had been assigned to protect. Her training demanded tactical analysis before action, but the reality of watching a professional killer approach an innocent woman eliminated all considerations except immediate intervention. Alexis abandoned her vehicle, retrieved the compact pistol she had concealed beneath her civilian jacket, and began moving toward the restaurant's service entrance with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years infiltrating hostile positions. Under fire, the service entrance that she had used countless times during her weeks of kitchen duty now represented the only viable approach to the battle space that might allow her to engage the threats without exposing civilians to crossfire. Her knowledge of the restaurant's layout, gained through weeks of systematic exclusion and isolation, suddenly became her most valuable tactical advantage in navigating the building while under hostile occupation. As she reached the service door, the sounds from within the restaurant painted a clear picture of the tactical situation she was about to enter. Multiple weapons were firing from different positions, indicating at least 4 separate attackers, as intelligence had predicted. The pattern of gunfire suggested they were moving in coordinated sweeps through the dining area, systematically clearing sections of the restaurant while preventing civilian escape through the main exits. Her earpiece crackled with one final message from her handler, transmitted with the desperate urgency of someone watching an operation spiral completely beyond authorized parameters. Rivera, if you enter that building, you are operating without sanction or support. Any action you take will be disavowed. Your career in military intelligence is over regardless of outcome. Acknowledge and comply with extraction order. The message represented the end of 8 years of military service and the beginning of something entirely different. By choosing to engage the attackers, she would be acting as a civilian with no legal authority, no backup, and no protection from prosecution if her actions resulted in unintended casualties. But the alternative, watching innocent people die while following orders to remain safely distant, violated every principle that had motivated her to accept dangerous assignments throughout her career. At 6:54 p.m., Alexis Rivera disobeyed direct orders from her commanding officer, violated operational protocols that had governed her entire adult life, and entered Château Belmont's service corridor with a loaded weapon and the absolute determination to prevent a massacre. The quiet line cook who had been systematically excluded from the building was about to demonstrate why professional killers should never underestimate the capabilities of someone they had worked so hard to eliminate from the equation. The narrow service corridor that connected the kitchen to the dining area was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the distant sound of sobbing from civilians trapped in the main restaurant. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows that would provide both concealment and dangerous blind spots as she moved toward a confrontation that would require every skill she had developed during years of combat operations in hostile territories. Through the swinging doors that separated the service area from the dining room, she could hear the measured cadence of professional killers conducting a systematic sweep of their target area. Their voices carried the calm efficiency of operators who had planned this assault meticulously and were executing it according to a predetermined timeline that allowed for specific amounts of time to locate and eliminate their primary targets. But what the assassination team had not planned for was the possibility that their carefully orchestrated exclusion of protective assets might not have been as successful as their insider intelligence had suggested. They had removed her from official duty and eliminated her legal authority to respond, but they had not actually eliminated her presence or her capabilities. The sound of approaching footsteps in the dining room indicated that one of the attackers was moving toward the kitchen area, possibly conducting a sweep to ensure no witnesses were hiding in the service areas. In approximately 30 seconds, Alexis would make contact with professional killers who believed they were operating without opposition in a building they thought they controlled completely. The next few minutes would determine whether weeks of systematic manipulation and exclusion had successfully neutralized the threat she represented, or whether the assassination team was about to discover that some people could not be removed from a mission simply by changing their work schedule. At 6:56 p.m., as the first attacker rounded the corner into Château Belmont's service corridor, with his assault rifle raised and finger on the trigger, he encountered something that 8 years of Navy SEAL training had prepared Alexis Rivera to become: a ghost who moved through hostile territory with lethal precision that redefined the meaning of professional competence. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. The struggling line cook who had fumbled with prep work and endured weeks of systematic humiliation disappeared, replaced by a combat operator whose movements flowed with the deadly efficiency of someone who had spent years eliminating threats in the world's most dangerous places. Her compact pistol appeared in her hands with fluid motion that seemed to defy physics, her stance shifting into the perfect isosceles position that maximized accuracy while minimizing her profile as a target. The first attacker never had time to process what he was seeing. One moment he was conducting a routine sweep of what intelligence had assured him would be an empty service area, and the next moment he was facing someone whose tactical positioning and weapon handling revealed capabilities that simply did not exist among civilian restaurant staff. His eyes widened in recognition of professional competence an instant before. Alexis's precision shot eliminated him as a threat with surgical accuracy that left no doubt about her true background. But what happened next demonstrated abilities that went far beyond exceptional marksmanship. As the sound of the gunshot echoed through the restaurant service areas, Alexis was already moving with the kind of tactical flow that turned confined spaces into advantages rather than limitations. She retrieved the eliminated attacker's assault rifle with movements that showed intimate familiarity with military hardware, checked his ammunition and communication equipment with practiced efficiency, and began advancing toward the dining room with the controlled aggression of someone who had spent years fighting in close-quarters combat. Her progression through the restaurant revealed tactical awareness that transformed the familiar kitchen layout into a combat environment where every surface became potential cover and every sight line was calculated for maximum advantage. The prep stations where she had endured Rousseau's criticism became strategic positions for observing hostile movement patterns. The walk-in coolers that had housed ingredients for countless services now provided concealment for flanking maneuvers. That demonstrated advanced urban warfare training. Through the kitchen's pass window, she could observe the tactical situation in the dining room with the kind of systematic assessment that turned chaos into manageable problems. 3 additional attackers were positioned at strategic intervals throughout the restaurant, their movements coordinated through communication equipment that suggested professional military training. But their positioning also revealed weaknesses that someone with advanced tactical education could exploit through careful maneuvering and precise timing. The second attacker discovered the difference between hunting civilians and engaging a Navy SEAL when he attempted to use the kitchen's industrial equipment as cover during their confrontation. His approach showed competence in basic room-clearing techniques, but Alexis had spent years learning to fight in environments where the enemy held every advantage except training and determination. She used the kitchen's steel surfaces to create ricochet, angles that eliminated his cover while positioning herself for clean shots that neutralized the threat, without endangering civilians in the adjacent dining area. Her weapon handling during the engagement demonstrated capabilities that would have shocked anyone who had watched her struggle with basic knife work during kitchen prep. The assault rifle moved in her hands like a natural extension of her body, transitioning between targets with the kind of fluid precision that required thousands of hours of specialized training under extreme conditions. Each shot was calculated, not just for immediate effect, but for tactical advantage in the continuing engagement with remaining hostiles. But the most dramatic revelation of her true capabilities came when she began coordinating the protection of trapped civilians while simultaneously engaging multiple armed attackers. Through hand signals and whispered commands, she directed terrified guests toward safe positions while maintaining constant awareness of hostile movements and potential escape routes. The tactical multitasking demonstrated command abilities that went far beyond individual combat skills, revealing leadership training designed for the most demanding operational environments. Catalina Vasquez crouched behind the bar where she had been trapped since the attack began, watched in stunned amazement as the quiet line cook she had dismissed as incompetent transformed into someone who moved through gunfire with the confidence of someone for whom combat was a familiar environment rather than a terrifying emergency. The woman who had struggled to julienne vegetables was now coordinating a defensive action that was systematically neutralizing professional killers. "Stay low and move when I signal," Alexis whispered to Catalina during a brief lull in the gunfire, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to managing life-and-death situations. "I'm going to clear a path to the emergency exit, but you need to follow my instructions exactly. Do not look back, do not hesitate, and do not stop moving until you're outside and behind police cover." The tactical plan she improvised during the engagement demonstrated strategic thinking that integrated multiple variables simultaneously: civilian protection, threat elimination, evidence preservation, and exit coordination. Her approach to each hostile contact showed not just combat competence, but tactical innovation that adapted basic military techniques to the unique challenges of fighting in a restaurant environment while minimizing civilian casualties. When the third attacker attempted to use captured restaurant staff as human shields to prevent her advance, Alexis revealed capabilities that redefined precision shooting under impossible conditions. Her shot placement eliminated the threat while ensuring zero risk to the innocent person being used as cover, demonstrating marksmanship skills that required not just exceptional accuracy, but perfect understanding of ballistics, angle calculation, and risk assessment under extreme pressure. The final hostile operative, recognizing that his team was being systematically eliminated by someone with capabilities far beyond anything their intelligence preparation had suggested possible, attempted to escape through the restaurant's loading dock with valuable intelligence about the failed operation. His capture demonstrated Alexis's training in pursuit and apprehension techniques that transformed the restaurant's basement service area into a tactical maze where her superior knowledge of the building layout provided decisive advantage. As police sirens finally reached the restaurant and emergency response teams prepared to secure the building, the dining room of Château Belmont had been transformed from a massacre scene into a tactical victory that saved 67 civilian lives while preserving critical intelligence about the assassination network that had planned the attack. The quiet line cook who had been systematically excluded from the evening service had instead orchestrated the most successful civilian protection operation in recent intelligence history. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As emergency responders began securing the scene and treating wounded civilians, Alexis Rivera stood in the middle of Château Belmont's dining room holding military-grade weapons and surrounded by neutralized threats, facing the stunned expressions of every person who had spent weeks questioning her competence and belonging. Chef Rousseau, emerging from the wine cellar where he had taken cover during the attack, stared at her with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just been shattered. The woman he had spent weeks systematically humiliating and excluding had just demonstrated capabilities that existed in a completely different universe from anything he had ever encountered in professional kitchens. The transformation was so complete and the demonstration of ability so far beyond anything anyone could have imagined that several witnesses would later report feeling like they were watching a different person entirely. The struggling amateur who had endured systematic harassment had revealed herself to be one of the most elite combat operators in the American military, and the implications of that revelation were about to change everything about how everyone in that room understood courage, competence, and the meaning of hidden strength. The silence that followed the last gunshot was broken not by celebration or relief, but by the sound of Chef Damien Rousseau slowly setting down the wine bottle he had been clutching in the cellar, his hands trembling as he emerged into a dining room that had been transformed into something beyond his comprehension. For 30 seconds, he stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Alexis Rivera as she efficiently secured the weapons from the neutralized attackers, her movements displaying the kind of professional competence that belonged in military documentaries rather than restaurant kitchens. "Jesus Christ," Hawthorne whispered from behind an overturned table where he had taken cover during the firefight. His voice carried the stunned disbelief of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just been obliterated. "Rivera... Who the hell are you?" But it was Rousseau who approached first, his footsteps uncertain on the debris-scattered dining room floor, his face pale with the realization that every assumption he had made about the woman he had systematically tormented for weeks had been catastrophically wrong. When he reached speaking distance, his voice came out as barely more than a hoarse whisper. "You're military," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact that was reshaping everything he thought he knew about the past 2 months. "Special forces, you've been pretending to be incompetent this entire time." Alexis looked up from the tactical gear she was examining, meeting his gaze with the steady composure of someone who had spent years operating under false identities in hostile environments. "I'm Staff Sergeant Alexis Rivera, United States Navy SEALs," she replied quietly. "I was assigned to protective detail for Catalina Vasquez due to credible assassination threats. My cover required appearing inexperienced to avoid compromising the mission." The words hit Rousseau like physical blows. Every criticism he had made, every public humiliation he had orchestrated, every systematic attempt to break her spirit had been directed at someone whose actual capabilities existed in a completely different realm from anything he had ever encountered. The realization that he had been tormenting an elite military operator while she protected innocent lives created a level of shame that transformed his expression from shock to something approaching horror. Catalina Vasquez, still crouched behind the bar but no longer in immediate danger, spoke with the voice of someone processing revelations that would reshape her understanding of the past weeks. "You've been protecting me this whole time. When you asked about my schedule, when you tried to stay close during service, you weren't being clingy or incompetent. You were doing your job. The assignment required maintaining cover while ensuring your safety," Alexis confirmed, helping Catalina to her feet with the same gentle professionalism she had shown during their kitchen interactions. "I'm sorry you had to experience this level of danger, but the threat was real and immediate." Hawthorne emerged fully from his cover, his swagger and condescending attitude completely absent as he tried to process what he had witnessed. The equipment failure. "Last Saturday when everything went wrong and you ... You handled it like you'd been running professional kitchens for decades. That wasn't beginner's luck or hidden talent. That was crisis management training. Military logistics includes food service operations under extreme conditions," Alexis explained, her tone professional but not unkind. The techniques. I used our standard protocol for maintaining mission effectiveness when primary resources are compromised. But it was Carson Williams, the veteran line cook who had questioned her background after the Saturday crisis, who asked the question that everyone was thinking. How long have you been watching us? How much of what we saw was real versus ... whatever this is? Alexis considered the question carefully before responding. My interest in cooking is genuine. My respect for professional kitchen operations is real. My struggle with your specific techniques and standards was authentic because I was learning your methods while maintaining operational awareness for threats that had nothing to do with food service. Everything about my personality and character was real. Only my background and current skill level were adjusted for mission requirements. The admission created a complex mixture of emotions among the staff members who had spent weeks dismissing her as inadequate for their profession. The realization that someone with such extraordinary capabilities had been genuinely trying to learn from them, even while enduring systematic harassment, forced them to confront not just their assumptions about her, but their assumptions about themselves and their own importance. Rousseau, who had built his professional identity around being the ultimate authority in his domain, struggled visibly with the revelation that the person he had tried to destroy possessed capabilities that made his culinary expertise seem almost trivial by comparison. All those times I criticized your knife work, your timing, your preparation methods, you could have shown me exactly how wrong I was. No, chef, Alexis replied with unexpected gentleness. You weren't wrong about culinary techniques. You're an expert in your field, and I was genuinely learning from your instruction, even when the delivery was challenging. Military training doesn't automatically translate to professional cooking any more than culinary expertise would make someone effective in combat operations. The grace with which he handled his obvious discomfort began shifting his expression from shame to something approaching awe. Here was someone who had endured weeks of professional humiliation, while possessing the capability to end his career with a single demonstration of competence. And she was choosing to treat his expertise with respect rather than contempt. Detective Sarah Chun, the first law enforcement officer to reach the secured scene, approached with the expression of someone who had seen the tactical aftermath and needed to understand how a restaurant employee had achieved what would challenge experienced SWAT teams. Staff Sergeant Rivera, we're going to need a complete debrief about tonight's operation, what you accomplished here. The precision, the civilian protection, the intelligence preservation, this is going in the textbooks. As emergency medical teams began treating the minor injuries that several guests had sustained during the attack, and federal agents arrived to secure the intelligence materials that Alexis had recovered from the eliminated operatives, the full scope of what had been prevented became clear to everyone in the restaurant. This hadn't been a random act of violence or a robbery gone wrong. It had been a sophisticated assassination attempt that would have resulted in dozens of casualties and an international incident. Dmitry Petrov, who had been one of the most vocal critics of her kitchen performance, approached with obvious difficulty finding the right words. I owe you an apology that I don't know how to make. We all do. You saved our lives while we were treating you like garbage because we thought we were better than you. You don't owe me anything, Alexis replied. You are evaluating my performance based on the standards of your profession, which is exactly what you should have been doing. The fact that I had other training doesn't diminish the value of your expertise or make your criticism inappropriate. But Rousseau, who had spent his career believing that culinary mastery represented the highest form of professional achievement, found himself confronting the reality that true excellence might look very different from anything he had previously understood. The woman he had dismissed as weak and unsuitable for his kitchen had just demonstrated capabilities that existed on a completely different level of human achievement. Rivera, he said, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been present in any of their previous interactions. If you ever want to come back to the kitchen, if you want to continue learning, you'll have my complete support and my sincere respect. I was wrong about everything. As federal agents began the process of debriefing and evidence collection that would occupy the next several hours, Alexis Rivera found herself surrounded by people whose entire understanding of strength, competence, and professional excellence had been fundamentally altered by witnessing her true capabilities. The systematic harassment and exclusion that had characterized her weeks at Château Belmont was being replaced by recognition that bordered on reverence, not just for what she had accomplished, but for the grace with which she had endured their treatment while protecting their lives. 3 days after the incident at Château Belmont, Alexis Rivera sat in a secure conference room at Federal Plaza, surrounded by intelligence officials whose expressions revealed the scope of what her actions had uncovered. The debriefing had evolved far beyond a simple after-action report into something that was reshaping the understanding of domestic security threats and the capabilities required to address them in civilian environments. Assistant Director Rebecca Morrison of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division placed a thick folder on the conference table, her voice carrying the weight of revelations that extended far beyond a single restaurant attack. Staff Sergeant Rivera, the intelligence you recovered from the eliminated operatives has led to the identification of a network that we've been tracking for 18 months. What happened at Château Belmont wasn't an isolated incident. Was part of a coordinated campaign targeting government officials and their families across multiple major cities. The implications were staggering. The assassination attempt that had seemed like a focused threat against Catalina had actually been one element of a much larger operation designed to destabilize confidence in domestic security and eliminate key personnel who posed obstacles to foreign intelligence operations. The sophistication of the insider assistance and the precision of the intelligence gathering suggested capabilities that traditional law enforcement was struggling to counter effectively. The surveillance device you discovered in your locker was manufactured by a defense contractor with access to military-grade technology, continued Agent Patricia Valdez from the Department of Homeland Security. The fact that hostile operatives could acquire and deploy such equipment inside a secure civilian facility indicates resources and connections that go beyond typical terrorist organizations. We're dealing with state-sponsored actors who have been operating on American soil with concerning effectiveness. But what elevated the significance of Alexis's actions from tactical success to strategic intelligence breakthrough was the realization that her cover assignment had accidentally positioned her to observe patterns that traditional surveillance methods had missed. Her weeks of systematic exclusion and isolation had actually provided unique insights into how sophisticated adversaries could manipulate civilian workplace dynamics to achieve operational objectives. Director Michael Torres from the CIA's Domestic Operations Division leaned forward, his expression indicating that he was about to reveal information that would change everything about her future. Rivera, your performance under these conditions has demonstrated capabilities that, frankly, we didn't know existed. The combination of technical competence, adaptability under extreme psychological pressure, and ability to maintain operational effectiveness while completely isolated from support systems represents exactly the skill set we need for assignments that don't officially exist. The offer was being made carefully, with language that allowed for plausible deniability if necessary, but the implications were clear. Her unauthorized action in violating direct orders to save civilian lives had not destroyed her career. It had revealed her suitability for assignments that operated beyond the conventional boundaries of military and intelligence operations. What Director Torres is suggesting, added Morrison, is that there are situations where traditional military units can't operate, where federal agencies lack jurisdiction, and where threats emerge in civilian environments that require capabilities like yours. Restaurant kitchens, corporate offices, academic institutions, places where hostile operatives can hide among innocent people and where conventional response teams would cause more damage than the threats themselves. The conversation was revealing something that Alexis had suspected but never fully understood. Her weeks of enduring systematic harassment while maintaining mission focus had actually been an inadvertent test of exactly the psychological resilience required for the most demanding intelligence assignments. The ability to function effectively while isolated, discredited, and psychologically pressured was precisely what made certain types of covert operations possible. Agent Valdez opened a second folder, containing photographs and documents that painted a picture of threats that traditional security measures were failing to address. We have intelligence about similar infiltration attempts in progress at law firms representing government clients, consulting companies with defense contracts, and educational institutions where the children of high-ranking officials attend classes. The pattern suggests that hostile actors have developed techniques for exploiting civilian workplace dynamics that our current protective protocols don't address. The photograph showed settings that looked completely normal: office buildings, university campuses, retail establishments, but each had been identified as a location where foreign operatives were attempting to establish positions that would allow them to target American assets. The complexity of these operations required responses that combined military training with the ability to function in civilian environments without revealing official connection to government agencies. What we're proposing, Torres continued, is a new type of assignment that would utilize your unique combination of capabilities. You would be embedded in civilian environments where threats have been identified, but where traditional protective details would be counterproductive. Your ability to appear vulnerable while actually representing formidable defensive capability could neutralize threats before they develop into crisis situations. The proposal represented everything that Alexis had unknowingly been preparing. For throughout her military career, her background in demolitions translated to understanding how attacks against civilian infrastructure could be planned and prevented. Her psychological training for resisting interrogation had proven valuable for withstanding workplace harassment that was actually sophisticated psychological warfare. Her tactical skills had demonstrated effectiveness in protecting civilians while minimizing collateral damage. But the most significant aspect of what was being offered was the realization that her experience at Château Belmont had accidentally created a template for a new type of protective operation. By enduring systematic exclusion while maintaining mission effectiveness, she had demonstrated that highly trained operatives could function in hostile civilian environments for extended periods without compromising their capabilities or revealing their true identities. The restaurant assignment was supposed to be temporary protective detail, Morrison explained, but what you accomplished has implications for national security that extend far beyond any single mission. You've proven that sophisticated threats operating in civilian environments can be countered by equally sophisticated defensive capabilities that don't require massive security apparatus or obvious government presence. The classified briefing materials revealed the scope of what traditional security measures were failing to address. Foreign operatives who could spend months establishing civilian identities, workplace harassment campaigns designed to eliminate protective assets, and assassination techniques that exploited the chaos of ordinary business operations. Conventional responses to these threats were proving inadequate because they were too obvious, too disruptive, and too easily anticipated by adversaries who had studied American security protocols extensively. What Director Torres is suggesting, Valdez added, is that you would essentially become a one-person security system for situations where larger teams can't operate effectively. Corporate environments, academic settings, social gatherings, anywhere. That hostile actors might try to exploit civilian dynamics to achieve strategic objectives against American interests. The assignment would represent something entirely new in intelligence operations, a protective asset who could function independently in civilian environments, while maintaining capabilities that could neutralize sophisticated threats without revealing government involvement. Her ability to endure psychological pressure while maintaining operational effectiveness had accidentally qualified her for missions that didn't exist when her military training began. As the briefing concluded and Alexis was given time to consider the offer, she realized that her weeks of systematic harassment at Château Belmont had actually been preparation for something far more significant than anyone had anticipated. The quiet line cook who had been excluded from kitchen operations was being invited to become a guardian, whose presence would never be suspected by those she protected or the threats she eliminated. The decision would determine not just her future career, but the development of capabilities that could reshape how America responded to threats that traditional security measures were proving inadequate to address. Her transformation from struggling restaurant employee to elite protective asset was complete, but the implications of that transformation were just beginning to be understood by those who made decisions about national security priorities. 18 months after the Château Belmont incident, Alexis Rivera stood before a group of 12 carefully selected individuals in a nondescript training facility that appeared on no government organizational charts. The faces looking back at her represented the future of civilian protective operations, former military personnel who had demonstrated exceptional psychological resilience, intelligence operatives who had shown adaptability under extreme conditions, and civilian specialists whose backgrounds had prepared them for assignments that required functioning in hostile social environments while maintaining perfect operational cover. 6 months ago, each of you was approached because someone in the intelligence community identified capabilities that go beyond traditional protective skills. Alexis began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had transformed failure into strategic innovation. You're here because conventional security measures are proving inadequate against threats that exploit civilian workplace dynamics, social hierarchies, and institutional blind spots that hostile actors have learned to manipulate with devastating effectiveness. The training program that had emerged from her experience represented something entirely new in American intelligence operations. Rather than creating obvious protective details that announced government presence, the initiative focused on developing operatives who could embed themselves in civilian environments for extended periods while maintaining capabilities that could neutralize sophisticated threats without revealing their true identities or official connections. Among the trainees was Maria Santos, a former Army intelligence officer whose background in psychological operations had prepared her for assignments requiring sustained deception under hostile conditions. Her selection for the program followed an incident at a defense contractor, where she had identified and neutralized an insider threat while working undercover as a data entry clerk for 8 months, enduring systematic workplace harassment that had actually been orchestrated by foreign operatives attempting to compromise classified projects. The techniques you'll learn here aren't about obvious displays of competence, Alexis continued, gesturing toward training stations that replicated civilian work environments with disturbing accuracy. Success in these assignments requires the ability to appear vulnerable while actually representing formidable defensive capability. You'll spend weeks learning to endure professional humiliation, social isolation, and psychological pressure while maintaining the tactical awareness necessary to identify and eliminate threats that traditional security measures cannot address. The program's curriculum combined elements that had never been integrated before: advanced combat training conducted in office environments, psychological resilience techniques tested through simulated workplace harassment, and tactical planning. Exercises that required protecting civilians who remained completely unaware of the dangers surrounding them. Each element had been developed based on lessons learned from Alexis's accidental success at Château Belmont and the intelligence gathered from subsequent operations. David Kim, a former Navy intelligence specialist, raised his hand with the expression of someone processing concepts that challenged everything he thought he understood about protective operations. Ma'am, how do we maintain operational effectiveness when the people we're assigned to protect actively work to undermine our position and credibility? The question reflected the core challenge that distinguished this program from traditional military training. Conventional protective details operated with obvious authority and clear chains of command, while these assignments required functioning effectively within civilian hierarchies that could be manipulated by hostile actors to isolate and neutralize protective assets before threats materialized. That's exactly the scenario we train for, Alexis replied, moving toward a mock corporate office environment where trainees would spend the next week learning to identify threats while enduring systematic professional sabotage. Your psychological preparation includes techniques for maintaining mission focus while experiencing sustained attacks on your competence, integrity, and professional standing. The ability to function under those conditions isn't just helpful, it's essential for assignments where failure means civilian casualties. The training facility contained perfect replicas of environments where graduates would eventually operate, restaurant kitchens where they might spend months protecting government officials' family members, corporate offices where they could monitor threats against defense contractors, and academic settings where they would guard the children of high-ranking officials without anyone suspecting their true purpose. Each environment had been designed to test not just tactical skills, but psychological endurance under conditions that would break conventional protective operatives. Lieutenant Rebecca Foster, whose background in Marine Force reconnaissance had prepared her for traditional combat operations, struggled with concepts that required appearing weak while actually maintaining superior capabilities. This feels like everything we've been trained not to do. How do we reconcile tactical superiority with appearing incompetent? Because the threats we're countering have learned to exploit our conventional strengths, Alexis explained, pulling up intelligence photographs that showed foreign operatives who had successfully infiltrated American institutions by studying predictable security protocols. When protective details are obvious, hostile actors can plan around them. When our presence is invisible, their preparations become useless and their operations fail before they realize they're being countered. The graduation exercise for the program required each trainee to spend 30 days embedded in a real civilian environment where intelligence had identified potential threats, operating without backup or communication while enduring authentic workplace challenges that tested every aspect of their training. Success was measured not by obvious tactical victories, but by the prevention of incidents that never occurred because threats were eliminated before they could develop into crisis situations. As the training session concluded and the new operatives prepared for assignments that would place them in corporate boardrooms, university campuses, and service industry positions across the country, Alexis reflected on how completely her understanding of strength and competence had evolved since her weeks of systematic harassment at Château Belmont. The quiet line cook who had been dismissed as inadequate had become the architect of protective capabilities that were reshaping national security operations. But the most significant aspect of the program wasn't its tactical innovation, it was how it had attracted individuals who understood that true excellence often required accepting temporary humiliation in service of larger objectives. The operatives graduating from her training weren't motivated by recognition or obvious authority, but by the knowledge that their invisible presence would prevent tragedies that would never make headlines, because they never occurred. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the program's psychological consultant, approached as the trainees filed out to begin their individual preparation for deployment. What you've created here represents a fundamental shift in how we think about protective operations. These people aren't just learning tactics, they're developing psychological capabilities that didn't exist in military doctrine 6 months ago. The comment reflected something that Alexis had begun to understand as her accidental innovation was studied and replicated. Her experience at Château Belmont had revealed gaps in traditional security, thinking that hostile actors had been exploiting for years. The program's graduates would fill those gaps by operating in spaces where conventional protective assets couldn't function effectively. 6 months later, intelligence reports would document the quiet prevention of assassination attempts at a Silicon Valley tech company, the neutralization of an insider threat at a prestigious law school, and the elimination of a foreign operative who had spent 2 years building a cover identity at a defense contractor. None of these successes would generate media coverage or public recognition, but each represented civilian lives protected by someone whose presence had never been suspected by those they guarded. As Alexis reviewed deployment assignments for her latest class of graduates, she realized that the systematic exclusion she had endured while protecting Catalina had accidentally created something far more valuable than personal vindication. A template for protective capabilities that could function invisibly within the civilian institutions that formed the foundation of American society. The quiet line cook, who had been told she didn't belong anywhere, had instead discovered how to belong everywhere, and had taught others to do the same. The legacy she was building wouldn't be measured in medals or commendations, but in threats that never materialized and innocents who remained safe without ever knowing they had been in danger. In a world where the greatest victories were the disasters that never happened, Alexis Rivera had become something entirely new, a guardian whose strength was defined not by what she could obviously accomplish, but by what she could silently prevent. And across the country, her students were learning to do the same, one invisible assignment at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.